All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our research and winemaking webinar series. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you will enjoy this webinar and will develop new skills and knowledge to be used in your vineyard and winery. So I'm Dr. Aude Watrelot. I'm an assistant professor and extension specialist of enology at Iowa State University. And I'm hosting and co-hosting this webinar with my friend and colleague, Drew Horton, who is a research specialist of enology at the University of Minnesota's Grape Breeding and Enology Project. So before starting the webinar today, here are some instructions. So the webinar is being recorded. If you don't know where to find the recording, I'm going to share a link with you in a few minutes. So it's going to be available on YouTube by the end of the week. If you have any questions during the presentations, feel free to use the chat box that you can see at the bottom of your screen by clicking on the three dots you see. You will be able to type any questions you have, and we will answer them at the end of the two presentations we have. Also, at the end of the webinar, you will receive an email to complete a Qualtrics survey to learn a little bit more about how we did today and what we need to change for the future webinars. So please just take a few minutes to complete the survey at the end. So today, we will have two presentations. The first presentation is going to be provided by Dr. Andreea Botezatu from Texas A&M, the Department of Horticultural Sciences. She's going to talk about some of her research on Verjus and on how it might be used to manage juice and wine acidity. Then that will be followed by a presentation from Chad Stoltenberg from Locust Lane Vineyard in Minnesota, who will share his experience producing Verjus and vinegar in his winery. After the presentation, we don't have a panel discussion today, but we will answer any of your questions with all our presenters today. So let's start by the presentation of Dr. Andreea Botezatu.
And I will introduce Dr. Botezatu received her honors, a bachelor degree in horticulture, majoring in enology from the University of Agronomy and Veterinary Sciences. I'm not going to try to pronounce the name of it, but it's in Iași, Romania, and that was in 2000. And then her master's degree in agricultural management from the same university in 2001. From 2000 until 2006, she worked as a commercial winemaker in Europe and Canada. She obtained her PhD in enology in 2013 from Brock University in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, where she then held a postdoctoral position from 2013 to 2015. In 2017, Andreea joined the faculty of the Department of Horticulture Sciences at Texas A&M University as an assistant professor and extension enology specialist. Her mission is to service the Texas winemaking industry through applied research, as well as through developing educational opportunities for current and prospective winemakers. Dr. Botezatu's previous work focused on wine aroma compounds and wine fault remediation, a very important subject, with a focus on methoxypyrazines and ladybug or Asian lady beetle taint. Her approach was both from a chemical perspective as well as one from a sensory evaluation. Currently, Andreea is directing her research towards solving wine quality issues associated with hot climate winemaking, such as she has in Texas, low TA, high pH, color instability, microbiological instability. Her interest continues to focus on chemical as well as sensory aspect as they relate to wine quality. Texas wine consumer attitudes are also an area of interest for Dr. Botezatu's research. Thank you, Andreea. Sorry, I slipped there once or twice. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew, for the introduction. Without further ado, I would like to start this presentation. I'm going to be talking about Verjus, a little bit of overview of what it is, and my main focus of research, pH management, and can we use Verjus as an acidifier in wine? That was one of the questions that I wanted to investigate in these projects. So Let's start with a little bit of discussion about Verjus. So generally speaking, Verjus is a sour juice that's made from underripe green grapes. And this product has been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. We know of it since the medieval era, and it has been used for both culinary purposes and health-related purposes. So Verjus, the name itself comes from French. It means green juice, literally in a translation, but it has other names as well, depending on where in the world you are. So it could be called husrum in Arabic, or abgure in Persian, agresto, agraz, or aguride in Romanian. So I assume many countries have a name for it, which means they are using it in some way, shape, or form. As I mentioned, this is an acidic juice that's produced from underripe fruit. It's characterized by low sugar, high acidity, and a sour and tart taste. It is a good source of antioxidants, phenolics, flavonoids, and sometimes anthocyanins as well. And its chemical makeup includes phenolics, acids, sugars, organic acids, some calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sterols. So if you compare that with lemon juice or vinegar, you can see that Verjus is a bit richer in its composition than those two other options. As I mentioned, Verjus has several uses, culinary uses. It's been used for many hundreds of years. It's used as a substitute either for vinegar or lemon juice. It can be used to add tartness and to sauces, marinades, and dressings. And nowadays is also very popular in cocktails. So mixologists love using Verjus for its flavor and aroma properties. In terms of medicinal uses, it has several potential health benefits that have been recognized in traditional medicine. It is believed to aid in digestion and improve overall gut health, has some anti-inflammatory properties, and can help reduce swelling and pain. It's also believed to have antioxidant properties and cardioprotective properties. It's also used in cosmetics and as a natural cleaner and disinfectant. The question that I wanted to ask about it is, can we use it for wine acidification? And a little bit of context, why am I asking that question? Well, I live and work in Texas. This is a map of kind of part of the world. We're here, this is Texas. Here, we're on the 32nd parallel. And if you look at this parallel, it goes through Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, Jordan, Pakistan. So we're really a southern state, and that means that it's hot. It's hot in summer, it's pretty warm in winter, and the temperatures don't really drop overnight. And what that means is that we have issues with acidity accumulation and pH in our grapes and in our wine. We tend to see grapes coming in with really low titratable acidities, 2 grams per liter, 3 grams per liter, 4 grams per liter, and really high pHs as high as 4.4, 4.5, which, as you all know, it's really high. So much of the research that I do is focused on pH management, and I guess this question about Verjus came naturally to me. I am from Europe. I've grown up with this product being made and being used in the kitchen. So it kind of, to my mind, it was like, well, why let these green grapes go to waste if we can use them to produce something that can help with acidity management potentially. So this is, again, looking at Texas wines from a survey that was sent out to the industry. More than 52% of our winemakers and grape growers indicate pH as being the most important wine quality problem in Texas. So high pH. And then we have color stability, tannins and structure, and others as well. Color stability, much related to high pH as well. Some of the tannins and structures issues are also related to pH. So big problem. These are the questions that I asked for my research. Can we use thinned grapes? So we're talking about grapes that have been dropped during cluster thinning, that are normally considered a waste product, at least in North America, to produce Verjus. Can we make it? And that would add value to both the vineyard and the winery, right? And it's also a sustainable practice. can we use that Verjus if we are able to make it? Can we use it to acidify wines? And okay, we drop the pH, we increase the acidity, but how would that impact the chemical sensory profile of the wines? That was another question that we asked. And also, is it economically feasible as an acidifier and also as a standalone product? So again, this product has been used on its own as a culinary product. You can sell Verjus as Verjus, not necessarily as an acidifier. Use it as an acidifier and hopefully have some profits from that. As I mentioned, Verjus, the grapes that are used to process for Verjus are usually generated during the cluster thinning process. So cluster thinning is usually done pre-veraison in the vineyard. So that means that the grapes are in their herbaceous growth phase, where the berries are small, green, and hard, and they have low sugar concentration and high acid. So somewhere around in here, this is where usually cluster thinning is done. And as I mentioned, instead of letting those grapes go to waste, why don't we bring them in, process them, and make Verjus out of them? So I did some research over 2 years. In the first year, we picked our green grapes at 45 days post-bloom and processed them into Verjus, into green juice. And then we held the juice at 5 degrees Celsius until the ripe grapes were processed. So we did the cluster thinning, we processed the green grapes, we held the juice, and then we waited for the grapes to ripen. We picked the ripe grapes and processed them into regular juice. And then we set up the experiment in this way. We had 2 reps for control, 3 reps for treatment 1 and 2 reps for treatment 2. The difference between the treatments was the amount of Verjus added. So we wanted to see how much Verjus do we need to add to the ripe juice in order for us to be able to drop 1 pH point. So from 3.56, which was our starting pH, to 3.46, to get an idea of proportions and how much we need for 1 point pH drop. And then the other one, the second treatment, was to a target pH. And our target pH in this case was 3.3. We were working with white grapes, Muscat Canelli grapes, so 3.3 pH for a white wine is appropriate, in my view. And for that, we needed to add a 10% by volume, to make a 10% by volume of Verjus addition. And this is how it was set up. So let's look at the Verjus chemistry. So this is the juice that we processed at 45 days post-bloom. As I mentioned, Muscat Canelli. It came in at 9.4 Brix with a pH of 2.6, a titratable acidity of 27.3 grams per liter, out of which malic acid 16.7 grams per liter and tartaric acid 9.6 grams per liter. And then we did our treatments. This is the control treatment 1 and treatment 2. So after blending in the Verjus with our ripe juice for the treatments, we have the control 3.6. This is our values for pH 3.6, treatment 1 3.3, our target pH for treatment 1, and then treatment 2 3.5, our target pH for treatment 2. What happened to the titratable acidity? So for the control, we had a TA of 4.1 with the grapes coming in, and then for treatment 1, it went up to 7.1, and for treatment 2, it went up to 4.7. Malic acid 1.3 in the control, 2.8 and 1.6 in the treatment respectively, and tartaric acid 4.1 in the control, 4.7 and 4.2 in the treatments respectively. And this is the juice prior to fermentation. Now, post-fermentation, once the juices became wine, and of course, all these were fermented in the same way, using the same yeast and under the same conditions. Nothing was different other than the addition of Verjus. pH for our control is 3.54, treatment 1, 3.31, 3.48 for treatment 2. Titratable acidity 5.6, 7.2, and 5.9. Malic acid 1, 2, and 1.2 in the treatments. Tartaric acid 3 in control, 3.6, and 3 in the treatments. And something also that I would like to comment on is Brix and alcohol. Now, when we add Verjus to a juice, Verjus has low sugar concentration. So what that will do, there is echo for some reason. Okay, so what that will do is it will dilute our juice. So it would lower the overall concentration of sugars in our amended juice. And what that means is that we will end up having lower alcohol levels in our final wines. So if we look here at the control, we have 23.9 bricks coming in, and then treatment 1 to 22.4 bricks because of the addition of Verjus, and treatment 2 23.6, which translates into alcohol concentrations of 14.3 in the control, 13.2 and 14.1 in the treatments. And I want to point out that adding Verjus not only increases the acidity and drops the pH, but it also lowers alcohol. And that, considering the general trends that we see in wine consumption nowadays, with people looking for lower alcohol wines for health reasons or just whatever reasons they have, I think this is something to consider, because it's a natural method of lowering alcohol concentrations as well as increasing acidity. Something to think about. So then we did some very simple sensory evaluations. We didn't go into much details. We didn't do descriptive analysis, but we did rankings on these wines. So for year 1, we did 4 different industry tastings in 4 different locations in Texas. And with industry tastings, I mean winemakers and grape growers were the ones who evaluated these wines. We presented the wines blind, the 3 wines, control, treatment 1 and treatment 2, to the participants when we asked them 2 simple questions. 1, rank the wines in order of preference, from 1 to being the most preferred to 3 being the least preferred. And the other question was, please rank the wine in order of perceived acidity, with 1 being the most acidic and 3 being the least acidic. And I know there's a lot of numbers and letters in these tables, but it's pretty simple results. So if we look at preference rankings, treatment 1, 2, and control, these letters here, if we look, they're all A. And from a statistical perspective, what that means is that there's no statistical difference between these rankings, between these values. So they were ranked pretty similarly in terms of preference. People didn't really love one more than another. They're very close. If you look at the values here, they're almost all 2. So 2.09, 1.96, 1.93. However, in terms of acidity, if we look at the rankings, you see these letters are different, A, B, C, which indicates statistical differences between these treatments. Control has the highest ranking as close to 3, which means it's the least acidic. Remember, 3 being the least, 1 being the most. Treatment 1, 1.6, treatment 2, 2.06, and control 2.29. So panelists, people who evaluated these wines, and we had a total of 218 panelists evaluate these wines, were able to tell them apart in terms of acidity. So clear influence on the perception of acidity on the palate, and no difference in terms of preference, which from my perspective means that Verjus addition did not negatively impact the profile of the wines that we made using it as an acidifier. And that was year 1. We had 2 publications come out of this work: Effects of Verjus acidification on Muscat Canelli grape juice and wines, and then the economic analysis, the feasibility analysis that was published in Beverages. You can find these publications online and read them in more detail. And I'm going to talk about the economic feasibility towards the end of this presentation. Oh boy, I gotta hurry up, sorry. So the next following year, we decided to do everything again, kind of a natural follow-up. We used different grapes this time. We used both white and red, And we actually used different varieties to acidify. So we used Blanc du Bois to acidify Marsanne and Tempranillo Verjus to acidify Syrah wines, just to see what happens if we do that. And again, the experimental setup, we had control with juice with no acidification and treatments. We had our Verjus treatments as in the past year, but we also wanted to compare that with other acidification methods. So on top of the Verjus treatment, we did tartaric acid, glucose oxidase plus catalase, or GOX, and the ion exchange column method. And we wanted to compare how these treatments perform. For Verjus, as I mentioned, we used Blanc du Bois. For our ripe grapes, we used Marsanne, and we had 2 treatments, target pHs of 3.7 and 3.5. The unripe grapes, these are some technical data. I don't want to spend too much time on it. We made our Verjus, and this is the chemistry. And I put everything side by side here. I included the Muscat Canelli from year 1 just to see them all in one chart. So for Tempranillo, the bricks were 3.9. I want to point out that in year 2, we did a 30 days post-bloom cluster thinning, and so we brought in the grapes earlier than we did in year 1. And we were curious to see if that would affect A, the chemistry, and B, the yield for our Verjus, because yield is important. How much do we get from a ton of grapes? So 3.9 Tempranillo, 9.9 Blanc du Bois, 9.4 Muscat Canelli. pH is 2.7, 2.6, 2.6. Titratable acidity 24, 30, and 27. 30 in the Blanc du Bois is, as usual, high acidity in there. Malic acid 16.5, 20, and 16.7, and tartaric 7.5, 8, and 9.6. And I want to show the polyphenols here as well. We measured those. So quite healthy levels of polyphenols in there with Tempranillo, Blanc du Bois, a little bit less, and Muscat Canelli Verjus. But you can see that they have some good concentrations of polyphenols in them. And then the wine chemistry post-treatments, we have the control Verjus treatment 1, tartaric acid, GOX, and ion exchange, 4.1 pH in the control, 3.7, 3.8, 3.7, 3.7 in the other treatment. So we try to keep everything equal. So bring them all down to the same pH. We focused on pH rather than titratable acidity using this method. So we bench trialed how much Verjus do we need to add, how much tartaric acid do we need to add, how much GOX, and how much resin do we need to add to be able to drop these pHs to 3.7 from the starting point of 4.1. And then we did that. And we can see titratable acidity 6.6 in the wines produced with Verjus, 5 in the tartaric acid, 6.8 in the GOX, glucose oxidase, and 5.6 in the ion exchange. Polyphenols, they not quite as high as the other ones because now their juice has been diluted. And alcohol content, again, we see a decrease in alcohol with the addition of Verjus because of the lowering of the overall bricks with the addition. And also lower alcohol in the GOX treatment. That's glucose oxidase, which transforms glucose into gluconic acid, therefore decreasing the available glucose for the yeast and then lowering the alcohol. Wine 2, treatment 2, so that was treatment 1, this was treatment 2. We see similar results, so 4.1, and then the pH dropped even lower. We were trying to reach 3.5 with our treatment 2, so a lower pH, higher titratable acidities overall, same kind of polyphenol content, and lower alcohol levels in the Verjus and GOX treatment. Now we did some rankings on these wines as well. We compared them side by side. I only, since we did this past year, I didn't have as much time to have as many tastings yet, but we intend to continue these evaluations. So I can only present 2. We, as I mentioned, presented them side by side, all these treatments plus control, and we asked the same questions, rank them in order of perceived acidity. and preference. And we did this in 2 locations, in North Texas and in the Hill Country. These are the results for North Texas. So for perceived acidity, the Verjus was perceived as the most acidic of all the treatments, even though the pHs were quite close. The TAs were somewhat different. So Verjus as the most acidic, and also the Verjus treatment was the most preferred of all the treatments. I haven't run statistics on this data, so this isn't as strong as the other data set that I presented, but these are the results that I'm seeing so far. I'm going to aggregate all the data at the end and run stats on it once I do that. And for the Texas Hill Country, again, 37 panelists, and again, these were presented blind. They didn't know what they were tasting. They were numbered and randomized in their presentation order. And again, the Verjus was perceived as the most acidic one, and it was also the most preferred as far as acidification methods go. And we also asked the panelists to generate descriptors for these wines, 3 descriptors for each of the wines. And if we look at aroma, I only included aroma data here. This is the Verjus aroma for the Hill Country. These are some of the words that the panelists used to describe the wines acidified with Verjus, and these are some of the words that they used to describe the control wines. Okay, and then North Texas, same thing, Verjus aroma versus control aroma. I didn't include the other ones, the other acidification treatments here, because we're focusing on Verjus. Do I have time to go through the economic part?
Yeah,
Yes,
40 minutes.
absolutely.
I'm sorry, I'm talking really fast, so there will be
You can
some
slow
time
down.
at the end for questions and answers. I'll be more than happy to go slower at that point. So we did some economic analysis as well, and we wanted to look at it from different perspectives. So from the vineyard side, does it make sense economically to cluster thin and produce Verjus? If you're not doing cluster thinning already, does it make sense? Or how much would you have to sell the grapes, green grapes, for to make a profit? And then we also looked at the winery as an acidification method, and winery if you want to sell Verjus on its own as its own product. So not use it as an acidifier, just sell it, bottle it and sell it. So on the vineyard side, we included all these steps that would cost the vineyard something. So hail netting, determining the cluster thinning amount, hand pruning the grapes, transporting, tractor driving, hand pruners, 5-gallon buckets. So we were very detailed in what we included in here. We think we didn't miss anything, and it the price per ton, based on our calculation, of course, this can vary based on how much you're cluster thinning and how much your yield is per acre to begin with, but price per ton came in at about $316.90 per ton of green grapes. Now, on the winery side, say you're a winery and you're trying to buy these grapes from a grape grower that has dropped them in order to produce 100 gallons of Verjus. So this cost was done per 100 gallons of Verjus. You'll have to buy the green grapes, and we put in a price of $800 per ton of green grapes. We are kind of conservative here because out of a ton of green grapes, we would most likely produce a little bit more than 378 liters, but we went with that. And then transportation, labor for forklift and moving the grapes into the winery, for cleaning the equipment, potassium metabisulfate, citric acid, running the grapes through the destemmer and crusher, pressing the grapes, analyzing the Verjus and trialing the additions, labor and materials spent cleaning, SO2 additions, labor to acidify the wines. Total costs were this, which divided by the 378 liters of Verjus brought our cost per liter of Verjus produced to $3.50. Now, if we do the math to compare that with tartaric acid addition, which is the most used acidifying method right now, it turns out that Verjus is more expensive to use than tartaric acid, liter by liter. However, we need to remember that when we add Verjus, 10%, 15%, whatever we're adding, we are increasing the volume of our wine by that percentage. So we end up having more wine in the end by 10%, 15%, or whatever we added, than if we just add tartaric acid, and we're selling that wine at whatever price we're selling that wine. So in the end, there is an added revenue from selling whatever percentage more wine you end up having because of the Verjus addition. So it's a profitable way of doing things if you are a winery. And also, and using it as an acidifier, and also Verjus as a commercial product. So if you want to sell it as its own thing, basically all these costs are the same as the previous slide. However, we added costs for bottles and corks and labels and bottling and cleaning, because now we need to bottle it to sell it on its own. And the break-even price per bottle, based on our calculation, turned out to be $5 per bottle of Verjus produced and bottled. Now, these are some of the prices that I found online for Verjus that is available right now to be bought in the States. So they can vary anywhere from $14 a bottle to $30 a bottle. If we have single varietal Verjus, fancier, whatever marketing they're doing, but you can get quite a hefty price for a bottle of Verjus. So clearly you can see that you can make a profit from selling Verjus on its own as well. And I just wanted to include a little slide about the health benefits as well of Verjus here. There are a number of studies. All these are the references that have done these studies and that show health properties of Verjus. So antioxidant activity, immunomodulatory activity, lower incidence of cardiovascular disease, stroke, and antioxidant capacity, antioxidant, anti-obesity, free radical scavengers, so on and so forth. And as I showed you before, we did some polyphenol work on our Verjus, and these are some of the compounds that have health-related properties that have been reported previously in these studies, and our concentrations that we found in the Verjus that we made in year 1. I don't have yet the results for year 2 for this. So in conclusion, yeah, you can make Verjus from cluster thinning grapes. It is effective at lowering pH and increasing acidity. It leads to a decrease in alcohol levels, which in my book is a good thing. It does not negatively impact the sensory profile of the wines. You can make an additional profit selling the green grapes to winery if you're a grower. Economically, using it as an acidifier makes sense, and you can make a profit producing and selling Verjus as a standalone product as well. Whew. And that is it.
Great job, Andreea. Thank you. That was, yeah, a good presentation. A lot of different information. Yeah, from the chemistry to sensory to economics.
Thank you.
It's good to see some numbers. I think that's really helpful for winemakers.
Thank you.
All right. So, all right, Chad, I think we could hear you. All right, so now if you have any questions for Andreea about Verjus, the research project that has been done on Verjus, please use the chat box to ask any questions. We're going to answer them at the end of the presentations. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Chad Stoltenberg. I'm going to make you presenter.
Can we hear Chad?
I think so. I just mute. Chad, can you unmute yourself and mute the other sound?
Chad, you have 2 screens up. Do you know that? You have the original Chad Stoltenberg screen, and then you have the Chad Michael Stoltenberg screen. Still can't hear you.
Because you're on mute.
We'll unmute. Okay, that could be a problem.
That's probably because you have another sound somewhere. because you are on two different screens or
Okay,
two
see if I
different.
can see if I can do anything to help with that.
Can you stop the volume on your other?
The other one I shut down, so let me see what I can make happen there.
Yeah,
All right.
you hear your voice, Chad, but there's a lot of feedback and echo.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if I can turn it down and make that happen.
I'm just muting. Sorry, everyone. We have some issues. Thank you to put your question in the chat box. Chad, can you hear us?
Chad also, earlier in the chat, Ode, he mentioned he perhaps could call in on a phone,
Yeah.
but I don't know how he would present his PowerPoint.
Yeah. Chad, are you still with us? You're on mute on both sides.
Okay, if you can, yeah.
Turn the speaker off. Or you know what? Let's start by some questions because we have some questions in the chat box. All right. So question from Amanda. Thanks, Andreea, for the great talk. I was wondering if you have any ideas how we could promote Verjus to people out of the wine industry, considering the growing of no-low beverages.
I know. I think it's such an opportunity for Verjus right here. How do we promote it? Education, working with wineries. I'm not really sure. We're not marketing people here, so other than education, there's not much we can do about it. But I would love to see more of it, and I'm really excited to see that it's actually gaining some ground. I mean, people do use it in bars for cocktails. People do use it in some restaurants. I was just talking to my mom the other day, and she sent me some photos from a restaurant she went to where they used Verjus for cooking, and they included some of the green grapes there. It looked really pretty. So some people are already doing it. We just need more of it. But I'm not really sure on what the best way to do the promotion is, other than education like this.
Did you show that the alcohol content was similar as just the control?
No,
Or
it was
a little bit
lower.
lower?
For the
It was
Verjus
lower.
treatment, it's always lower because it dilutes the sugars. It's low in sugars, so it's coming in. Some of it, the Tempranillo had like 2.6 bricks coming in, and you add that at 10% or 15%, and you can see a drop in sugars overall, which leads to lower alcohol. So yeah, for sure, it's
I
more
just,
alcohol.
I thought that was fascinating. I really, I could, when you were describing it, I was like, oh boy, I wonder how this worked and if there was still a good preference, if people still liked it. That's wonderful research. I assume you've told everybody in Texas about this.
I do.
Yeah.
Yes, of course I do. I've had people from California reach out to me and ask about this. And I know Amanda from New Zealand is here. She has done research on Verjus. I'm really glad, Amanda, that you could join us. I don't know if you can unmute yourself, but if you have any additional comments, you know, you have a lot of expertise on that. I'd love to hear from you.
Chad, can you hear us? You can hear us, but we can't hear you. Nope.
Try to unmute yourself and we'll see. Hopefully it will work.
Yeah, you're still feeding back. You still have that other screen open. And I'm convinced that's the issue.
Yeah.
Okay, you understand. I'll stop saying it.
All right, let's ask another question. Dorothy is asking, our grapes tend to be much more acidic, and so I'm wondering if our Verjus harvest window would be later.
Yeah, I would think so for sure. There are, as I mentioned, there are no set in stone dates for this process. So you do what works for you, really. Now it depends if you're doing cluster thinning for the quality of the rest of the grapes. There is a window in which you should do it if you want to see some impact on the grapes that are left over on the vine. But usually it's up to veraison, so no later than veraison. I'm not sure how high of an acidity you're talking about, but I would imagine that it would drop some towards the veraison stage.
Dorothy also asks, I was going to ask about this. How do you stabilize Verjus for bottling? I'm assuming you have to filter it.
Yeah, so what we did was filter it, add SO2, and that was it. It's got really low pH, high acidity. It's pretty stable on its own, and it's got low sugar. So we didn't have much of an issue. Now, of course, you could sterile filter it if you wanted to, if you're making enough volume to be able to put it through a sterile filter. I would recommend that. But it's pretty stable. You don't need to do a lot to stabilize it. Just some SO2 and that was it. Filtration.
Wouldn't need to use any sorbate.
No. Not in my experience. Now, of course, I didn't investigate all possible concentrations of sugars and acidity, but in my experience, we didn't have any issues with with that.
There's a follow-up question. Do you know if there's what needs to be done to the Verjus in order to make it sellable per the Food and Drug Administration? Does it need to be pasteurized?
I don't know if it needs to be. I don't know. Short answer is I don't know. I haven't looked into
Again,
it.
I tend to agree with you. With the very high acidity, 18, 20, 30 grams per liter, and a pH of what are we dealing with? 2.7?
2.5,
2.5.
Yeah.
And maybe 2 to 4% sugar.
Yeah,
There's not much that can live in that environment.
I agree. So, and with a little bit of SO2 in there, like.
Well, that's what they do. That's what they do for grape. I mean, it's basically grape juice.
Yes.
It's unripe grape juice, but it's
Yes.
grape juice.
Yeah.
Anyway, Chad, are you? No,
Right.
still can't hear you.
So you can probably unmute yourself. I removed the other screen. So that should work.
You said you moved, you turned off the other screen.
Yep.
Chad, can you unmute? Trying. All right.
Odd, can you not unmute Chad on your own? On your end?
No, I just can request him to unmute.
Okay.
Did that do
There
it?
you go.
Yes, victory.
Yay.
Victory.
Okay. And actually, at least as when I was producing Verjus, and selling commercially, you had to go through HACCP training for juice, which is different from straight HACCP training because you're entering the food supply. So it will be different. At least that was our experience with doing it. But I don't mean to step on anything, but that was one that I was hearing a question as you guys were going. And that is our experience was you had to do HACCP training, and we were doing HACCP for different other foods too. But Verjus was a specific, because it was a juice, it wasn't just a matter of doing it, as you would for just regular food products. And actually, maybe we should see if I can get this.
Let's try
get it
to
going, and then we
sharing
can
your
give it a
screen.
spin.
So to share your screen, you should see the share content button at the bottom.
Yes.
And
Oops.
you should be able to do so. So let me introduce yourself. So Chad Stoltenberg holds level 2 wine credentials through WSET and the International Wine and Spirits Guild, where his credentials also include wine and food pairing, certified wine judge, and certified wine educator. Locust Lane Vineyards is at Chad's family farm in southwest Minnesota and is co-owned with his wife, Sherry Stone. Chad is the head of operation for Locust Lane Vineyards, where they grow grapes for Locust Lane production of verjus and balsamic vinegar. Many of the pairing recipes are developed specifically for cold climate grapes, specializing in the specific flavors that work with our special cold climate grapes and the finest wine from around the world. So Chad, the screen is working perfectly, the sound is working perfectly.
Really?
The floor
Okay,
is
good.
yours.
All right. I'm going to be operating off of watching just my slides. So if there's anything that needs to be addressed, let me know. So I will try not to duplicate too much the wonderful presentation that we just heard, but there'll be a few things that that'll get duplicated. Can you hear me relatively well?
Perfectly.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So verjus, once again, is the acid, from unripened grapes. In the Middle Ages, it was an acid tasting stock prepared with the unripe grape juice and mixed sometimes with lemon or sorrel or herbs. And this is all referenced in the Larousse Gastronomique. You see it marketed under also Verjus and Verjus. And so there's some different things where we have some labeling things in this country that since there's no technical term for verjus in labeling food, it can go down, some different directions in terms of what it gets called. And that is often, as you'll see in the balsamic vinegar part of this presentation, that is a thing that we run into in labeling in this country. The earliest thing that I could find written about it was the master cook for King Charles V. There's also some different things in the two pieces mentioned there. And one of the great cooks was from Escoffier, where they started using it to brighten veal stew. And that's one of the great things about, well, it would be true of any acidic juice of any sort, same the way with a gastrique or whatever. It actually brightens something that has, that needs more acid, which of course will brighten those flavors. That's just gives, Apicius goes back obviously further than that. I'm trying to skip over things that I think were already, duplicated in terms of its use. One of the things that I most noticed in my work with it back when we were producing it commercially was that since it was from different countries, I tried to include those in that you can often find recipes from other regions of the world or traditional uses in other regions of the world, rather than just what we can do here. And one of the things we did with it in terms of in the vineyard and then also in its use for cooking was not only to just use it as for sauces and so on. Actually, the bulk of our stuff was getting sold, I believe, to bars that were using it as a mixer. As Andreea mentioned, that type of thing is not uncommon. The other place that we found that we could use it was to actually mix it with fruits in making jams and jellies. It lowers the cost. It's way cheaper to use green grape juice than it is to use the fruit at 100%. And it because of the high acidity, it actually increases the flavor of those fruits without using the fruits per se. So we used to do a verjus raspberry jam, a verjus cherry almond jam, and a verjus, we did it as an apple, like a spiced apple jam that was, a fall thing where you put in vanilla and, oddly enough, bay leaf and cinnamon, and with 70% apple juice and 70% verjus, 30% apple juice. And it was it was shockingly popular. And it was way cheaper than anything that, at least the farmers markets we were at, it was considerably cheaper for us to produce what we were doing than everybody else around the farmers market. So the science of it, or here we go, in the Persia, where we were talking about Agresto in Italy, may have been slightly fermented, And actually, that is also something that I know of within the Persian tradition of Abgura, only because my brother-in-law is Persian, and he said they used to make it and then put it in a bottle and set it on set it on the wall back behind their deck and let it cook for out in the sun for a couple of days and then just drink it. So I was rather shocked that he never lost a bottle to, there is a little bit of sugar in there and it's going to ferment. So, so they must have just been getting it. They must have been attacking it before it got to where it would blow the corks off the bottles. But so that's part of it too, is that some cultures will actually just drink it just as a acidic and rather sour drink. But it's, when you need something different than water once in a while, it's a good option. It's a non-alcoholic option. And so that's another use. Let's see, that's that. So one of the things that we noticed is that it is also, since it's an acid, it'll actually react with certain other foods. Sauces of egg yolk and verjus thickening. Verjus, in fact, seemed commonplace even in its agresto back in the Italian culture and then in Florentine cooking. It's also known as hosrum in Lebanon and agraz in medieval Spain. Harvested at the size of chickpeas, which probably would vary a little bit by variety for what we were using in this country. Our experience was, of course, with grapes that will grow up here, which was, almost all University of Minnesota varieties plus some varieties from Elmer Swenson. And so that was we were harvesting them between 6 and 8 bricks, was where we were trying to aim for it. And that kept the acids high enough to actually be able to be utilized. Now, in our case, I happened to notice in Andrea's presentation, I think you were picking it in in early June or early to mid-June. For us, when it gets to 6 or 8 bricks is actually in early to mid-August. So in the vineyard, for us, it was a useful item in that we would just pick it in the beginning of August. And by the time State Fair rolls around for us, which is the end of September or end of August, we were already done while everybody else was gearing up for their primary harvest. And as the fruit ripens, of course, the sugars increase. So we're trying to capture the acids before they go down while the sugars, before the sugars get too high. You must decide, therefore, whether or not you're using dropped or thinned fruit or a clear cut method like we were doing. There's one thing that I was mentioning it a little bit before I started. There's at least in our case, in the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, as the whole food manufacturer license, it's different from what the wholesale food manufacturer is a different approval than would be for wineries. Even though the wineries up here at least have gone through a thing where they can actually get food. You can create food in the wineries for sale. That's still a different licensing from what, or at least it was. I don't know if it still is at this time. If you're selling, you also need to address it as HACCP for juice. And that is a different HACCP training than it is for other anything else you would be introducing into the food system. So and even if you don't do the HACCP, you could do it and sell it within Minnesota, but in order to sell it across state lines, you actually had to pursue the HACCP for juice, and then you have to have a process letter, which you qualify for after you do the HACCP for juice, but you still have to get a process authority to approve the letter or get a letter from them describing that what your process isn't going to cause problems in the food system. If you're using the dropped or thinned fruits, from the pros of that, you're using fruit that would otherwise be put into the compost pile. You can make retained fruit of higher quality, and you reduce trips across the vineyard for foliar feedings in order to solve any issues that they may be having. You can actually make it to where the fruit will ripen more evenly. As far as the ripe fruit that you would decide to pick, it'll actually ripen faster and more evenly than it does when you've got, you know, as much stuff sticking out at the end of the vines. The other thing is you got to hand harvest it. So, because obviously if you're only taking part of it, that's a factor. So the clear cut method fit our needs best. You had fewer trips across the vineyard. You actually didn't have to spray as much and the birds are never really interested in them. So it's already done before the birds start to care. You could possibly machine harvest if you're doing a clear cut method. We didn't do that, so I don't really know if that would work or not. But it gets the fruit off the vines a little bit earlier. It allows, therefore, the grapes to harden off better, which for us is a big thing up here where we have these kind of winters. The other thing you could potentially do, I would think, would be to harvest it 1 year for Verjus and then come back the next year and harvest it for wine grapes, as an example. So the bad part of doing the clear cut method is out of that portion of your vineyard, you don't get any wine. You're also picking in the heat versus a traditional fall harvest where it's a little bit more comfortable temperature wise. And you still got to get out there and get them all picked. So the good things about Verjus from these northern tier grapes, or these upper Midwest grapes, if you will, is that they are very naturally high in acid, and that actually it helps maintain that higher acid for the purpose of using it in foods. That's just talking about the northern grapes, which we certainly know a lot about up here, Drew. But the crosses that survive these cold winters tend to have high acidity, even when the sugars are at a stage of being usable for winemaking, and that's why it has so many different uses as a tart ingredient for foods. And I thought it was very interesting within Andrea's presentation how that could affect wines that are potentially need some acid. That's a fascinating use that I had not thought of. It works works with wine rather than against it. Like if you were that's why in classical dining, you tend to have the salad at the end. And the reason is because if there's any vinegar, red wine vinegar, white wine vinegar, whatever in the salad course, that way you're not trying to pair it with wines, because those two things are going to battle each other. The traditional French uses were in dressings for green salads. One of the people that you should consider really trying to read on, if at all possible, is Maggie Beer. She's actually very much a champion of Verjus. I believe she's still with us. I'm not entirely sure. But there were some other ones that Andreea had different ones that were commercially available currently. I don't believe that for the one that's listed here, Red Newt, I don't know if they still do it. Terra Sonoma is one that actually sells it as 8, and so it'll be like 8 degrees and 6 degrees, and that's actually I'm pretty sure that's where they're harvesting it at in terms of Brix level. So, and another use is it's actually typically what is used as the quote unquote wine in mustards. If you ever saw the old Grey Poupon commercials where they were using wine. Well, actually what they were using was grape juice, and they were using specifically green grape juice. If you look up the Méthode de Montardier, I apologize, Aude, for my butchering of your language, but that was actually, typically they will call for green grape juice, and they didn't mean green grapes as in white grapes. They meant green grapes as in underripe grapes. And it makes for killer cocktails like we were talking earlier. And Verjus is just sour. I mean, there are some subtle hints. I actually get a little bit of apple out of a lot of ours. But for the most part, it's just tart. And so it makes things have a tendency of just making things taste more like themselves effectively. Similar to salt. Salt will make stuff taste more like itself. So does Verjus. So wine-friendly sauces, ingredients in jellies, ingredients in pesto instead of lemon juice. It's wonderful in Beurre Blanc. It's wonderful in gastriques. And so in any sauce really that typically uses vinegar, you will create a sour. You've got a sour agent that will be wine-friendly rather than using vinegar, which will battle that wine. Chefs, home cooks, and food producers. There's some that where we used to market it. They were all people using our Verjus. What to do with it? I'm actually going to skip through some of this because we've already talked through some of it. Jelly, the raspberry jelly, the Verjus cherry almond. We actually used to use it as a coating for some almonds that we would put different. We would take the northern tier grapes that were being made into wine. We actually took tasting panels of people and had them put together groups of foods that or flavors that we felt went with very specific grapes from this region, and actually then would season almonds. You'd put the Verjus on them to make it stick, and then you'd put the different combinations of spices and so on those almonds, and it made for a useful thing in the winery that way. You could do almond parsley and basil as a pesto. You can also do cilantro as a base to that. The almond parsley basil is actually out of that Maggie beer book. She refers to it as salsa agresto, that she found when she was looking for different things and doing an Italian cookbook. And that was one of the things that they did with it there. Okay, so we're going to switch over to Moscato and balsamic and vinegar in general. The reason that I bring up the Moscato as something that maybe you know about, maybe you don't. It literally means cooked must. Mosto and Cato is cooked. And you use, instead of using the underripe grapes as you do in Verjus, you use ripened grapes. In fact, you use as ripe a grapes as you can get, in large part because of the fact that you're trying to increase that, you're going to boil those grapes down. You're going to, it captures the concept of agrodolce, which is a sweet sour that you find in a lot of what we serve in this country is balsamic glazes. You find all kinds of odd things that are called balsamic. And there's a reason for that, is the term balsamic in this country doesn't actually mean anything from a labeling standpoint. That was an interesting thing that I found. What we did in those regards, we wanted to do a traditional method balsamic, which of course is Italian. And in the Modena and Bologna regions of Italy, from the standpoint of making it commercially, you're cutting down the volume of the stuff that you have by almost 50%, and then you're putting it into barrel and letting it do a simultaneous change from grape juice to wine to vinegar. And it actually depends on which. You have to use a yeast that actually will only utilize, well, first of all, it'll ferment at 50 brix or somewhere between 45 and 55 brix, and that doesn't kill the cells of the yeast. And then it actually is turning over to vinegar because of the bacteria that you introduce as well. So Moscato then is just the cooked must before you get to the point of actually turning it into, or trying to turn it into balsamic. And one thing that we noticed, and I for more than just me, that Moscato, when you cook that grape juice down that far, it really doesn't matter what variety you use. I'm there again, a level 2 sommelier, and we were all trying it going, yeah, I just am not really finding a difference between Marquette grapes and La Crescent grapes and or Frontenac grapes. It's just, you're trying to, increase that. So from that standpoint, it actually makes the most sense to just try and use the highest sugar grapes you can find, because, and therefore, Frontenac's a very good option from that standpoint, because it typically gets into the 25 to 27 range. So the pros regarding the cold climate grapes, one of the people that I talked with that served a bit as a mentor for us with the balsamic project was Paul Bertoli. And he makes traditional method balsamic in California, not for commercial sale, but he really did the study on it, or did a significant amount of study. He was the person that used to run Oliveto. He was actually one of Alice Waters' chefs back out of Chamonix and in California. But one of the things that he found with the California grapes that were a struggle for him in trying to make balsamic is that they weren't high enough in acid. They were kind of fruit bombs with tons of sugar, but they didn't have the acid to stand up to what they needed to for the amount of sugar that was going to be left. So one of the things with the cold climate grapes that's a positive is that we have grapes that are already very high in acid. Many warmer climate grapes tend to be, like I say, fruit bombs that have tons of sugar, but they don't have necessarily enough acid to counteract it. We have acid in spades here. So more pros if you actually pick at the same time as other grapes, so you can just divert some of it off to be pressed and then eventually cooked down. The other thing is, since you're producing that within wherever you're going to cook it down, you actually don't, until you start trying to ferment it, you don't have to worry about where that's happening. But we'll talk a little bit about that more, because trying to do that within a winery just seems really gutsy in my opinion, but as you get to run your wineries the way you want to. So Mostacato is a tasty alternative because you already get the acid and the sweet that you get from true balsamic, but you don't necessarily have the wood flavor, because once you've cooked it all down, you've introduced the yeast, and then and you start to put it in barrel. Then there's a whole Solera system within the barrels, and the traditional woods used for that. But if you just take the Mostacato, which is already cooked down to a syrupy quality anyway, and you can use that as a drizzle on flatbreads and pizzas and charcuterie trays and over roasted vegetables, it does the same thing. The acid's kind of high, therefore it gives a brightness to what you're serving, and also a sweetness due to the sugar concentration. So Mostacato versus balsamic versus true balsamic or traditional method balsamic, these are different things, and in large part due to the labeling restrictions and legal definitions. Most balsamic in the United States is simply red wine vinegar with either reduced grape must, which would be Mostacato, or just sugar. And that's the vast majority of balsamic. If you just walk into a grocery store and grab a bottle of balsamic, chances are that's what you're getting. Or one version of that is what you're getting. So, there again, balsamic, it's kind of a labeling faux pas that we never really have that definition of it in this country. If you look at most of it, it just says red wine vinegar and sugar, or red wine vinegar and cooked down grape must. The traditional method is it's a living thing, which is partly why it's a little more dangerous to produce it in a winery. You're introducing bacteria that you've been trying to keep out of your winery, and you're potentially introducing it. If you don't do it in a separate facility, you're producing it right there, and that's really seems dangerous. So half mile to a couple miles away is probably a better idea, just to not take that chance. So the bottom line, again, the term balsamic doesn't actually mean anything from a legal labeling standpoint. That's partially how balsamic in this country is often really harsh and unbalanced, because it's just cheap red wine vinegar, made with sugar. And for those who say that, well, I just boil down the cheap stuff, all that does is raise the cost. So if you buy the cheap stuff and you condense it by half or by a fourth, you've raised the price of it, in which case you might as well buy the better balsamic anyway, so, and especially if you're raising grapes. So then the price has been doubled. There seems to be a point of confusion, and generally it's not that big a thing, because most people aren't making hundreds of gallons of it. But when you go from reducing a quart to a pint, it's no big deal. But when you're reducing 100 gallons to 50 gallons, suddenly that doubling effect, affects your bottom line considerably more. So therefore, your as a standalone item, the Mostacato actually is probably a product that is nearly ready to bottle as a hot pack item. The minute that it actually gets down to the bricks level that you want, it's very sweet. It's also got some acid. You can also do what we used to do and refer to as baby balsamic. We'd actually include the wood while we were boiling it. And that actually gave us an awful lot of those. And we'd include all 5 or 6 woods in that boil down. And it gave us what we referred to as baby balsamic. And that was what we were able to market as a balsamic product in this country. It was strictly a condiment level. And it'll be half a century before we would ever produce anything like what you get in Bologna, for instance, because for one thing, that's all consortium related in Italy. It is not, there's a consortium overseeing what gets labeled as traditional method balsamic, either for Bologna or for Modena. Effectively, you're making grape syrup and you're just boiling the dickens out of it, and therefore you're not trying to reduce that. You're not trying to maintain the fresh fruit flavor. You're kind of doing the opposite. You're trying to get rid of it. You're seeking that cooked flavor. And since any grapes can be used, because the varietal nuance is really, for the most part, lost. You'll be cooking it to roughly the must about 45 to 55%. And then you can add all the wood alternatives while you're producing it or while you're boiling it down. If you decide to pursue the traditional product, the vinification project happens at the same time and then the acetobacter are introduced. After you're done with the boil down, you got to make sure you let it cool too. The big thing with the boil down, just as a practical thing, is that when you do that boil down, you got to make sure you don't invert that sugar, because if you do, you've got 100 gallons of road tar. I mean, because that stuff, once you invert the sugar in that stuff, there is nothing you can do with it. You might as well pour it out on the ground. So you got to be really careful as it gets down into the 40, 38 to 40. All of a sudden, you'll be staring at a big pot of it, and all of a sudden it'll just start to foam and bubble. And once that happens, if it goes too long, all of a sudden you've inverted your sugar and it's lost. So you need the yeast that you choose to stop working at about 25% residual sugar. That's sort of up to whatever you like. And then it goes into a battery of barrels. These barrels are chosen by different wood varieties. As the liquid condenses, then it's moved, half of it down to the next barrel and done that year to year. And then the stuff effectively comes alive again the following spring. I mean, at least up in this region where it gets cold enough to freeze it. So the traditional woods for the barrels are chestnut and oak and cherry and ash and juniper and mulberry. People will do specific ones of those and just do it, for that many years and let it keep condensing down within a single variety. You can get junipero, you get, what I would suggest doing, if at all possible, I assume it's still available, is Paul Bertoli's Cooking by Hand. It has a quite extensive section on balsamic production, and it requires a while to read it. And it's a fascinating read, and somebody who's really done a ton of work on it. And actually, he has his own barrels that he started with for his son when his son was born. That book dates back to the 90s, so that that young man should be enjoying some really awesome balsamic by now. Regarding that book, if you're interested, make sure it's a great read, and it'll lead to cooking better. Generally speaking, it's really truly transformative. So with that, I'm done, and I will try and get you we'll take any questions.
Excellent.
Hopefully that was better than we thought it was going to be. Hopefully,
it all worked fine, Chad.
Good.
It was a great presentation, and it was very interesting to hear the differences between just regular vinegar and then monocoque.
Sure, I can comment on that a bit if you'd like. And if you're taking red wine vinegar and white wine vinegar, one thing that I've noticed, and this is probably just something because everybody's really scared of the white wines turning into brown liquid or starting to oxidize and so on, is that I've found with many of the white wines up here, it's almost hard to make it into vinegar. It's just, I think they're so concerned about making sure they acidify it enough to where it doesn't go bad that you've pretty much got to practically cook it in order to get it, enough of that burned off to make it work. One thing from a wine vinegar production standpoint that might be, and I know Drew, you and I talked about it some, is that the those squirrels that you found that were being produced, those, if you can heat those, because it's, and what a squirrel is it's, as near as I can tell, it's wood staves and built in a square, and then you put your wine in it. Well, from a vinegar production standpoint, one of the ways of making wine vinegar, if you can do traditional Orleans method, which is wonderful and nuanced and beautiful, beautiful stuff for all practical purposes.
Oh.
But if you wanted to do an industrial type vinegar, and you took that thing that Drew's holding up or got there and actually heated it, you'd be able to make wine vinegar in about 24 hours. Because, I mean, it doesn't to make an industrial type wine vinegar, it doesn't take very long, because you're adding heat to it. And so that increases the speed at which it turns it to wine vinegar. So you're not going to raise the good stuff, or you're not going to make the good stuff necessarily in there, but you can make it really, really fast. And if that's part of your goal, I mean, it's the same difference between the Moscato versus the balsamic. You'll make fantastic balsamic if you actually take the time to do it. But by the time you buy the barrels, keep adding to it for 7 years minimum, there's a lot of places to spend that money along the way. That, it's like, unless you really, really want to, if you want to make stuff this is $85, which is about what it runs, that's fantastic. But, and we did it. It's not that it's impossible to do, but it from an economic standpoint, you gotta know your winery is going to be around a while, or your acetea, as it were, if you're trying to do traditional method balsamic. And so since they have a consortium that's actually grading their balsamics, they have condiment level balsamics too, which are much cheaper and much, but they're also not as good. So it's just a matter of what level you want to do it on.
All right, Chad, I need to break in. We've only got 10 minutes left. We do have some questions. Really quickly, do you have a website by chance?
We do not actively do that anymore, but
So,
can I type you my email and have people, if they have any further stuff they want to get, I'll be glad to share it with them. I
was just going to say, anybody who wants, anybody watching today or anybody watching this on YouTube, you know how to get a hold of me, dhorton@umn.edu. You can get a hold of me or get a hold of Ode at Iowa State University, and we can give you Chad's contact information. Chad, that was an excellent presentation. I'm a huge fan of balsamic vinegar, so I'm very curious about this. Ode, I know we have a few more questions. Do you want to read those?
Just a quick comment. Would you be able to share again to your screen what you were showing, Drew? Because we were in a small screen show.
Oh.
So it wasn't easy to see what you were showing. If you can just...
So, yeah, anybody who wants to know about this, again, just reach out to me. This is called a squirrel.
Oh,
or a square barrel. And so it's a stainless steel. This one happens to be 4 gallons. And it's got these holes, and you can order different woods and different type of oak staves to put in your square barrel, in your squirrel. They are distributed by a local brewer here in Minnetonka, Minnesota. So again, if anybody wants any information about square, they're made for winemaking and for making spirits. But Chad saw this. He was over here one day and said, "Oh, that would be ideal for cooking down Moscato." So I think if you just Google squirrel, SQUARREL, squirrel barrels, the distributor's information will come up, but you can always contact me for that. They make them in 4 gallon, 10 gallon, 30 gallon, and 60 gallon. So you can get them for spirits or winemaking, or for vinegar or balsamic making. All right.
Thank you. So just a question that we have from Steve. I think that's related to Verjus, that both of you can answer. What press is the best and what yield is expected per ton of grapes?
We didn't find that the yield was that much different, which really shocked me. I thought it would be way less. But the grapes are they hang on to their flesh a little bit more than they would if they were ripe, of course. But the reduction in at least at the stage we were picking them at was, at least 80% of what we would have expected to press it out at regular. I don't know, actually, Andrea, you picked them much greener than we did, I think.
Right. So we used two different types of presses in the 2 years that we did it. We used the basket press in the first year and a hydraulic press in the second year, and both of them worked just fine. Yield was somewhere around 55%, which was higher than we expected. Seeing the grapes so small and hard, you'd think, oh, you're barely going to get anything out of them. And we got, like I said, about 55% yield from all of the varieties. They're close around that age. So we worked with 3 different varieties at 2 different picking times, and we got around 55% yield. Now it goes a little bit lower once you rack. You let it settle and you rack, but generally speaking, let's call it 50%.
So when you say 50 or 55%, you mean compared to for wine production?
No, I mean starting from the weight of the grapes that you bring in.
Ah, yes. Okay.
So if I bring a ton of grapes in, I'm going to get about 500 liters of Verjus out of that.
And for wine grapes, you get about 600 liters.
6, 7, it depends.
ton.
Yeah, you get more, but I really thought we would get a lot less with a Verjus than we actually did. I was pleasantly surprised. We made so much, we didn't know what to make with it at the end of the day. So we bottled it, and people love it. Yeah.
Chad, real quick,
Yes.
what, if you don't mind sharing, what yeast strain you were using?
Actually, I got that from Paul, so I don't really feel like I can share that. I'm sorry.
Okay, all right.
It was a yeast that he suggested that, and actually, if you get a hold of him, he actually runs Framani, FRA apostrophe MANI. He runs a salumi company these days.
Okay.
And so you might see, and actually he's very willing to share, but I kind of feel
No,
like
that's
I don't
fine.
feel like I should do that.
Where does one get a commercial strain of Acetobacter?
The repository in California.
Okay.
I
think there's some other out there. I think if you Google, I think even White Labs sells some vinegar mothers, as they're called.
Yep.
Go ahead, Andrea.
I had a comment about Verjus aroma and taste. I noticed Amanda's comment here, and again, Amanda is a researcher who has done quite a bit of sensory research on Verjus in New Zealand. In my experience too, with the 3 different varieties, the juices can be quite different. The profiles can be quite different and interesting, and they're a little bit more than just sour. They can have some floral and fruity notes as well, depending on the variety and the stage where you pick it at. They're quite complex. I enjoy drinking it with just sparkling water. You can make a spritzer out of it, and it's just so pleasant and refreshing. Add some mint in there, and you've got a lovely summer drink. But they can be quite complex, depending on a number of factors. Yeah.
We've got another question about pressing. So do you destem before pressing?
We did not. I don't know.
We did not either.
Is it because it helps to get a higher yield? Or
We just didn't even consider it. We just pressed.
Okay.
Clusters.
Yep.
That way you don't have to clean the destemmer.
But I mean, I don't see anything against it. If you want to destem,
Sure.
I don't see a problem with that either.
I've noticed again with our northern climate grapes, they have a lot of solids, and sometimes those solids can be quite viscous or gummy. And so, so doing pressing with whole clusters, all those little stems and pedicels and the rachis sort of help the juice get out of the press a little bit. Chad, you never use rice hulls as a press aid, do you?
We tried that once just because the person that we were, the place we were having them pressed had them. And so we just thought it with one pressing, we thought we'd see if it's made any difference. Didn't really matter.
It made much difference. Okay. Good to know.
Didn't seem to affect it a whole lot. So.
Okay.
I just have a question about the technique you use to cook the grapes to make the Mostocotto.
Yep.
What equipment do you have? How do you do that?
You need a large, either you can do it just in a giant stock pot. You can get 80-quart stock pots and do it, and that's a lot of stuff. But I mean, and so you can do it that way, and it actually works pretty well because that way your volume, even when you get down to when you get the stuff cooked down by half, you still have quite a bit in there. Because otherwise, if you get it down to where you only have a half an inch in the pot, then that's when the stuff tends to foam up and become a problem. Yeah. The other one would be to use an actual commercial grade or a standalone heated vat. That's actually what we did the last couple of years. Was we actually were, I think we had 160 gallons at a shot that we could do.
So was that like a big commercial steam kettle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was effectively a steam kettle.
Big soup pot.
Yep.
Which some commercial kitchens, some rentable commercial kitchens have available.
That's what we were doing, because we weren't operating out of a winery to do it. We were actually operating out of a commercial kitchen space, because that was before the wineries could even do food production in them. So that was prior to that.
Have you ever heard of anybody using maple sugar facility?
I know you had mentioned that before. That would probably work really well, because that keeps it moving to where it shouldn't have that foam up issue as much.
Very interesting.
Yeah. No, I think that actually, that's cheaper than buying one of those steam kettles. So, but
okay.
You also got to put it in somewhere that you can actually get approved to do it. I mean, big thing like anything with these places is water. You got to make sure you got access to water and lots of it, because that stuff's sticky, and it's you've created something that's crazy sticky at that point. So.
All right. Well,
one more thing. I see a comment from Amanda again, and I think she has a really interesting question. She says that she knows some viticulturists, again, in New Zealand, who have been picking all the grapes from the vines for Verjus production, so 100% for the Verjus. And the question is, do you think this can cause any issues in the vine itself over time? I think that's a very fair question to ask. I don't have an answer to it, but I would assume so. You're changing the metabolism of the vine, and I don't know. If anybody has any experience with that, let us know.
We did that, and we used to. That was why I was suggesting, if you're concerned about it, what you could do is do all Verjus one year, then the next year let them raise grapes, similar to what they do with ice wine production.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them will do ice wine one year and then skip the following year and do regular stuff and then bring back the ice wine the following year. We didn't notice a big difference, but by the time we were picking them, we were only 6 weeks away from a freeze. So it actually helped them harden off because there was nothing on them so that might be a climate variation a little bit for us up here in the northern states.
There's also a question about pectic enzymes. I think that's a good idea. We haven't used them, but I think they could help.
We did not use them either. So.
All right. I think we've covered all the questions. Are you going to say goodbye, Ode, and tell people?
Yeah, that's the time. We are 1 minute late, but we make it. So thanks very much for your great presentation. Thank you, Andreea. Thank you, Chad, for all the research, all the work of production of Verjus and Mostocotto and balsamic vinegar and all those different types of alternative products. So we hope this webinar was helpful for you and you get ready for the season that is coming. So just before closing, I want to remind you that the next webinar is going to be October 22nd. We're going to talk about low alcohol wines. So we have a little bit of time, but start planning that on your calendar. And then we'll have a webinar about challenges of color management in wines later in the season. Also, you're going to have a link for a survey in a few minutes. If you want, you can scan the QR code and complete that survey. That's really just to help us improving the webinar series. And so on that note, if you have any questions that we didn't have time to answer, feel free to email either Drew or myself, and we will share with Andrea and Chad. Otherwise, have a great season. Thank you so much for being with us today, and see you in October.
See you.
Thank you,
Cheers.
everyone.
Thank you.
Have a safe and happy harvest, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, bye.